Houston, what's up, dude?
I'm doing good. Hi, Bobby. How are you doing?
Good to see you again. Everybody
Good to see you.
listening, the Corner Blitz is one of my favorite TikTok accounts to follow. I think Houston lays it out in a way that's not only not insulting to hardcore sports fans, but also if you don't know much about sports at all, it's so entertaining that you kind of start wading into it. So I think that's a good compliment. You talk up and down to folks.
That's awesome. I'll take it. Thanks, you.
One of the videos that I've been waiting to talk to you about was this FBI college basketball video that you'd put up. You may have put it up a month or so ago. And so it's kind of how the whole scandal fell apart and how it fell
Mhm.
apart. But I'm going to let you tell the story. So what was the FBI doing to begin with?
So, about 5 years ago or so, the FBI kind of announced out of nowhere that there was a big investigation in progress into college basketball. And when they originally announced it, it seemed like it was going to be an investigation that was going to break college basketball wide open. And a lot of the biggest names in the sport were reported to be implicated in the investigation. And, media was running wild with it, talking about all that could come out of this investigation. We saw kind of drops of news come out of it, and then out of nowhere, the investigation kind of stopped, and no one really suffered any consequences from it, except for a few, low-level assistant coaches. And a couple months ago, we found out what really happened with the investigation, which is that the FBI did have some big names involved, and they set up a sting operation in Las Vegas. They got a hotel, and they had an FBI agent go undercover and bring basketball coaches into Las Vegas, give them money under wiretap, and all reports are that that sting operation was a success, and they got coaches, handed them money, got them on tape. But what happened was, with the leftover money, the FBI agents kind of had a little bit of a spending spree in Las Vegas, spent a lot of the money on casinos and drinks. And by doing that, kind of ruined all of the evidence and investigation. And it led to the FBI kind of shutting down a lot of the funds for this investigation and ruined a lot of the good work that they were doing, and limited what the FBI was able to accomplish with that investigation, and it got a lot of people off the hook by doing that.
Which is crazy because you just have these guys, or guys, meaning it could be men or women, but you have these guys who are trained, who have been sent there to do a job that they've also been a part of for a long time. But there's a little extra money, and they just thought they had to go spend it on, some drinks and some gambling, and it spoiled the whole thing. It was like it corrupted the whole investigation. But if that leaks out, because that part of the story did, how come we're not seeing any leaks of like the tapes that they got of the coaches?
Exactly, yeah, and I think that is how a lot of programs really lucked out, and I think we obviously saw Kansas was involved. I think a lot of the Nike schools, when this investigation was announced, were really the nervous ones, because that was kind of the crux of what was happening, was that these assistant coaches were making side deals with the shoe companies to get their players to sign long-term deals with the shoe companies in exchange for getting massive amounts of money to either the coaches personally, or to funnel the money from the coaches to the players to get them to go to their school.
Even when you look at LSU and what happened there with their, in not this last season, but he got into some trouble, and
Mm-hmm.
he's not coaching somewhere else. But was he involved in this specifically?
I don't. I think he kind of had a whole world of trouble under himself, but it really was a connection of the FBI was uncovering a real thing that was happening in college basketball, which was all this under the table money, and it's really something that we knew was happening all along, and everyone kind of turned a blind eye towards. But another thing that kind of helped out these college basketball coaches was the start of NIL, and now everyone is used to college players getting paid a ton of money. So if you hear about a college basketball player getting paid, $1 million, that's not quite as shocking now as it would have been, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, because when the Will Wade story came out, they had audio of a recording, and not the same. But I just imagine if he's doing it there, he's probably up in Vegas hitting it hard too. This is all speculation on my part, but if Will Wade's on a phone call and they got him recorded, I can't imagine he's not up on the Luxor, going hard as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then McNeese State hired Will Wade. There are a couple of those coaching situations that I look at now. That'd be a tough one. Also, Ole Miss,
Mm-hmm.
their basketball program with Beard,
Yeah.
that would be a tough one. I mean, how eventually he has to answer questions, right? Because I've watched a couple of the pressers and he doesn't answer anything at all. Houston, what do you
Mhm.
think that the idea is down at Ole Miss? Is it just win and who cares? Is it
Yeah, I think that's kind of a motto that they've seen find a lot of success at other programs where, I mean, as long as you're winning, people aren't going to be asking questions. And now it flips on its head when you start losing, then people have all sorts of questions. But, you keep the fans happy, you keep the boosters happy, you can stay away from a lot of trouble.
when you look back at Bruce Pearl, who basically cooked a hamburger for a kid and, gets sent out of Tennessee, and he's at
Mm-hmm.
Auburn now. But you're right. Sometimes things that happen now, they're all okay because the rules have changed. But when it
And
happened 10 years ago, it's a whole offense and you gotta cleanse the program.
exactly. And I think that's one of the things that makes the NCAA so frustrating. There's a great example. There was a kid from Florida State this year. He was one of their top freshmen that they brought in. And right before the season started, he got suspended for over half the season. I think it was about 20 games or so because he took a flight from Europe to America when he was a teenager that was paid for by some training company. The NCAA suspended him 25 games for that. It was, a $300 flight. He had to miss basically his entire freshman season because of that. And then you have, all, as you mentioned, all these coaches running around doing insane things that, because they're winning, because they're more powerful, they don't ever face consequences. But the NCAA can really push its thumb down on people where they can find reasons to do so and know that they won't get a ton of pushback from.
What do you think about Reggie Bush? Should he get his Heisman back?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think at this point, I think, unless you're in jail, you should be pretty much carte blanche for getting everything, getting everything back you deserve, because I think everyone is kind of reshaping in their minds what a college athlete brings in terms of value and what they should be receiving in terms of value.
Even just gambling in general, right? I mean, the betting culture is now just a normal culture. I was doing an event and I was speaking at an event and I was sitting next to a pastor and he was like, "Hey, what's the line on the?" And I'm like, "You're a pastor," but then I go, "Well, I shouldn't." It's not. It's legal. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with it. And he was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I bet on these games sometimes for fun." And so even that, I leaned to like somebody like Pete Rose, who obviously
Mm-hmm.
has been banned from baseball because of the gambling he did back in the day. But do you feel like that's different with Pete Rose because he was betting within his sport, although he says it's not his own team?
Yeah, I mean, the when you're gambling on a sport that you're an active participant on, it definitely gets into murky waters, and I think that's one of those things that any sports league should have a really hard stance on, because when you get into the actual integrity of the games and the scores themselves, you can kind of ruin a lot by doing that. So on the Pete Rose thing, I'm kind of in agreement of him. It's tough because it's hard to tell the story of baseball without Pete Rose, but you do have to suffer consequences when you are in those waters.
I'll throw one more at you. It's Calvin Ridley, who was suspended for all of 2022, basically, for betting on NFL games. And he's back. He's playing this year. So
Mm-hmm.
is Pete Rose so different than Calvin Ridley?
Honestly, I don't think their stories are that different. I don't think Calvin Ridley is going to be breaking any NFL records and have a Hall of Fame case that Pete Rose may have. But I think the NFL definitely used Calvin Ridley as an example to show that if you come close to messing with the gambling waters, you're going to get in trouble. And I think actually that's a rare instance where I'm kind of in agreement with the NFL there.
So, Houston, if you were the director of all sports and the commissioner of all sports, would you feel that Pete Rose has served his time and now should be allowed to be back in, which then puts him in the Hall of Fame? Or
Mm-hmm.
would you say no forever? Or would you let him die and then put him in the Hall of Fame so he can't screw anything up?
In my opinion, I think he has served his sentence in terms of punishment, and I think it would be good before he, passes away to get him in the Hall of Fame. And I actually feel the same way about the steroid guys as well, just in terms of I don't think you can show the history of baseball without mentioning Pete Rose, without mentioning Barry Bonds, those guys that are so integral to the sport. And if you want to, put an asterisk in there, however you can, that's fine. But they were so important into the story of baseball that you have to show what they accomplished.
That's a great point about the steroid era in baseball. That was an era when the strike hit and we needed something amazing. And it's like You needed Sosa and you needed Bonds and you needed McGuire to all come out and hit all these home runs to get people interested in the sport. But now we're going, well, since you had all the home runs because you were taking steroids, we're going to make sure you're not allowed in the Hall of Fame, or it's going to be very difficult for you to get in. You're right, Houston. That is very hypocritical, and I stand against it. I'm going to forget about this conversation in 20 minutes, but I stand against it because we should let all the steroid users in if they performed well.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's honestly like a similar mindset we have to the NIL now, where when the steroid stories were first breaking in the early 2000s, all of us were, we shocked, or we were at least acted shocked by it. And I think looking back now, a lot of those reactions were probably overreactions, just because we can appreciate now, 20 years back, just how talented Barry Bonds was, how impressive it was for Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa to go on those home run streaks. And even before the steroid pop from Barry Bonds, he probably was still a Hall of Fame player. Those guys absolutely, deserve the recognition now. And I think they've more than suffered the consequences. They probably deserve some consequences for, what they were dealing with. But they need to be honored by Major League Baseball, I think.
Yeah, we needed them to do what they did to bring baseball back. And they did, right? It was all over everywhere. It was top of the cycle, news cycle and sports cycle. But now we're punishing them for what we needed them to do. We suck. Yeah, me too. We suck for not being like, we love you, steroids. A couple other things I want to talk about here is San Diego State. Now, what a run. Made it all the way to the end. Didn't win it, but all the way to the end. And now possibly going over to the Pac-12. What are you hearing about this?
Yeah, so, San Diego State was one of those teams that was being looked at by the Pac-12. And, I did a video about this because, I thought you could make the case that San Diego State had more pressure in that tournament than maybe any team in tournament history, just in terms of the fact that the future of their entire program could have very much well been on the line in terms of whether they were going to get in the Pac-12. The Pac-12, looking at San Diego State now, I think is very different than looking at San Diego State a few months ago. So you can add a team into your conference that, just made a Final Four, has a lot of, bright future ahead of them. And as San Diego State, the people will make fun of the amount that the Pac-12 is making in terms of comparing it to the SEC or the Big Ten. But when you're comparing the amount the Pac-12 makes to the Mountain West Conference, and those smaller level conferences, it's a huge difference. So San Diego State getting Power 5 level money injected into their program, they can become a really good football team. They're a pretty decent football team right now, just with, lower level conference funding. You give them Pac-12 funding, I think they can be, a serious team on the level of Utah, those other Arizona State. I think they'll be right in line with those teams. And that's a huge momentum for the San Diego State program. And building off that tournament run, I think it's going to be hard for the Pac-12 to deny them now.
So when you talk about the influx of cash, and, I live in SEC land and my favorite team's an SEC team, and I understand what it can do and what it allows. I mean, facility-wise, coach-wise, you just can kind of go down the line. But what's the difference in Mountain West and Pac-12 money?
So the Pac-12 teams make, somewhere between 30 or 40 million a year right now, and they're going to sign another media contract soon. It's kind of, we don't know yet how much money they'll make, but it'll probably be a little bit more than they're currently making now. Mountain West, teams, they make as little as, 5 million a year.
Dang.
So you think about a 6 times, annual revenue increase for San Diego State. They can do a ton with that. Not just, in terms of the players they can hire a much higher level of coaches, all across the board, everything that you need to run a football program nowadays. And I think San Diego State, they knew that they were on the precipice of getting invited, joining in. And that's why I said I think San Diego State had as much pressure as any team, because they knew that they could make a name for themselves in that tournament run, and they pulled it off, which is pretty impressive.
I like realignment. I think it's fun. I think it's, I understand it's a business. I think if you get lost that it's not a business, then you start to get sad. But I understand it's a business that I also think is very fun. And so with realignment in the SEC, we have Oklahoma and Texas coming in, not this year, but the next year after that. To you, is that something that you're excited about? And secondly, we've seen kind of the leak. I think when Saban went down for media days, they had who Alabama was supposed to play because Saban was upset. Like, what are you hearing about how these coaches are feeling about it? And have we kind of been told who they're not pods really, but are you in totally that that's who each team is playing as their specific 3?
it seems like the teams now have a pretty decent idea of how the scheduling is going to work, and it seems like you'll have about two or three teams that you will play every single year. And the problem is, there'll be a good thing for some teams, a good, bad thing for other teams, but they're not going to really keep the annual rivalries that SEC fans have come to know. The big ones like Florida, Georgia, Auburn, Alabama, those will stay. But Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, Tennessee, Arkansas, LSU, those games may not happen on an annual basis anymore. And again, you can look at that in a good way or a bad way. I'm all for these conference expansions. I'm really excited for it. And I think it's something that is kind of being under discussed, but college football is going to change so much after this upcoming season. You think this is the last season with 4 playoff teams. The SEC, Big Ten, Big 12, Pac 12 are going to look like completely different conferences after this season is over. And even the way the conference championship games are played, you're not going to have an East champion and a West champion playing a championship. It's just going to be the 2 teams with the best, overall records in conference play are going to be playing in these conference championship games, which means you could get, an Alabama, Auburn, SEC championship game, a Michigan, Ohio State, Big Ten championship game. The ACC is already doing that this year. Their conference, sides are out the window. So you can have FSU, Clemson playing an ACC championship game, and these are big time changes that are going to really affect how fans view the sport, even how teams play. Because with a 12-team playoff, a lot more teams are going to be really invested in those final games of the year. Where now, we come to the last 2 weeks of the season, there's really only 6 teams that we pay attention to in terms of national prominence. Now, there's so many teams that are going to be trying to get those last few spots. And I think it's going to make a really fun end of November run for college football fans.
Yeah, me too. I'm pumped about it because, again, it gives more programs a reason to be a very loud, annoying vocal program. And that's awesome. I always say if I'm annoyed at your team or if I like hate you, not you, Houston, I like you, but like hate you because of your allegiance, that means your team has been beating mine. And like I can't stand tennis. I can't stand the Volunteers. I hate them. Yeah. But I tell them that all the time, that it's a respect thing. Because if you weren't a thorn in my freaking foot, I wouldn't hate you. I hate the Longhorns. Maybe I just hate orange, guys. You ever think about that? Maybe I just hate the color orange for that reason. But it's, whenever you really despise a team, it's because usually they've gotten the better of you a bunch of times. But this is going to make more programs unbearable for longer. And I'm all for it because that means I'm invested in. I love the 12. Let's go to 16 before we even get the 12 going, I say.
It's going to happen. Yeah, we see that in college basketball over the past 40 years. Teams keep getting added to the tournament. It's going to happen in college football as well.
What do you think? And I got a couple more questions for you, but NIL, as far as what's happening in the NIL space now, and I will tell you that I've done a few NIL deals with players myself, so like I am educated on the process. However, what I probably am not educated enough on is what rules may be put into place soon to kind of corral in the old Wild West right now. Like, what are you hearing NIL-wise that somebody could do to just not make this a land of, I'll give you $1 million and literally you got to come and sign a piece of paper? I mean, there are no rules at all. What's going to change?
Exactly. And unfortunately, I honestly don't see that changing anytime soon because the NCAA right now is making the same mistake that it's made for the past, 20, 30 years or so, which is they're hoping that, Congress is going to fix all their problems for them. They're trying to go through Congress, through their senators to create, a national NIL bill. And there's just not support for that. And I don't think the NCAA is going to have any success with that. And short of that, the NCAA doesn't seem to have any real interest in creating, NIL barriers themselves. They probably know that, as an institution, they're not powerful enough to keep these NIL deals. At this point, I think the NCAA kind of has its hands behind its back. And, we're only going to see these NIL issues grow unless conferences come together. The SEC and the Big Ten decide, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to set these laws ourselves. We don't care what the rest of the NCAA is doing, but we're going to make these laws just for SEC teams, just for Big Ten teams. And, that spurs further points of what people have been saying the future of college football is, which is just the SEC and the Big Ten separating away from the NCAA. And I think that may be the spur of all of this.
And same question about the portal. Again, new-ish, but I feel like there have got to be some sort of rules, especially when it comes to poaching. We saw some of the guys that were in the tournament saying we're already being poached and we're still playing in the NCAA tournament. Do you see the NCAA or any governing body stepping in and making any new rules about the portal?
I think the transfer portal is one area where that the NCAA actually can, make some changes for the better because on the whole, I think the transfer portal has been a really great thing overall for both football and basketball, and especially for the players as well. We've seen already that football they have these transfer windows now which weren't there before. So you have a couple weeks after the season ends, and we're going to have the transfer portal open back up here in a few weeks after spring practice ends. And that organizes it a little bit. As far as the tampering goes, I don't know how that you're going to settle that issue because if Nick Saban wants a player that's on a lower level college football team, he's probably going to get the word out to him. And that guy probably wants to hear from Alabama himself.
Final question. Final question. I've already asked the final. I'm asking the final. It's the double final. If you were stock marketing these SEC football teams, I assume you're a Bulldog fan. I'm not. I know where you live. Are you a big Georgia fan?
Actually not. I graduated from Florida State, so I'm a Seminole fan at heart. I try to be as impartial as possible. But when it comes to FSU, it's a little tough.
You guys should come to the SEC too. Like you guys in Clemson should both just come over and join the fun. Don't you agree?
Your mouth to God's ears. I hope that happens.
So if you were good, then you're not into a team. Stock market up. What SEC team do you look at and go, man, if I were buying right now, that would be the one I would jump into?
I really like LSU. I value bringing back starting quarterbacks. LSU is bringing back a pretty good one. They've got another really good one waiting in the wings. And I think, as much as we all make fun of Coach Kelly down there, I think he's a great college football coach. And, I think LSU is going to be a problem for a lot of teams. Georgia, I don't think I'd buy stock in Georgia just because their stock price is probably more than I could afford right now. But LSU is the team that I'm eyeing, and with Texas joining the SEC, I think the amount of money that they're throwing into that Texas program, it's almost going to be impossible for them not to be good coming up here in the next few years.
I'm going to start market up South Carolina and Beamer, what they're doing over there, and just in every way, it's just positive. They're getting recruits. I don't think they're going to national championship next year, but that's a stock that doesn't cost a whole lot that I'd buy right now because it just is continuously gaining
well, you
value.
Look at how they ended their season. Yeah. Not many teams ended as impressive a season as South Carolina did.
I cursed Clemson. That's why they lost. I got on the air and I cursed Clemson, and that's why Clemson lost South Carolina. Okay, final part of this same question. Who do you sell because stock's going down?
I'm getting a lot of bad vibes out of Gainesville right now. The Gators program, started with their disastrous recruiting pitch to their quarterback. They lost their, big time recruit. They lost a lot of guys that were going to be, starters or potential starters for them to the transfer portal. And Napier, I think he hasn't shown, to be a really bad coach in my mind, but I'm not sold on him being able to build the Florida program into what the fans expect. And if you're not building a media championship roster for those Florida fans, they are going to get you pretty quick.
And I sell Tennessee because I hate them. That's all. I just don't want it in my portfolio. I just don't want them, and so get rid of it. Okay, listen, everybody. You guys follow on Twitter and TikTok The Corner Blitz. Houston does great work. I'm telling you, if you're a hardcore sports fan or just a novice, like he does the kind of stuff that's entertaining and interesting and really gets into the weeds on some of this stuff. So go follow The Corner Blitz. Houston, man, keep doing what you do. I love having you on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I always love talking to you.
All right, there he is.